Let's kick straight off, and I'm delighted to welcome my colleague, Daniel Knapp, who is IB Europe's Chief Economist. Daniel, over to you to look at how we can tackle disinformation by seeing what actually it is and what can be done in the industry to curb the spread.
Thank you, Helen, and hello, everybody. Disinformation, a big topic that has captured public attention in the media discourse, in the political arena for probably the last 3 years with a growing, ever-growing volume. But lies, deceit, seeding information that isn't true for personal and political gains is as old as human history and key ingredient of many dramas. Now, although disinformation isn't new in that sense, it first occurred as a term, as a fixed term, in the 1952 great Soviet encyclopedias, Disinformation, and it was a fairly ideological term. Let's say disinformation is the dissemination in the press, like in the radio predominantly, of false reports intending to mislead the public. And it also stated that the capitalist press made wide use of disinformation. Now, we can already see this notion of weaponization in there, of using deliberate information now broadcast through the media, amplified through mass media, to change public opinion. Fast forward a couple of decades and we are bang in the age of social media, of big platforms, of the open internet, where information is abundant. And debates about disinformation have been growing tremendously. However, despite a lot of political, stakeholder, and also academic research on the topic, there's still some grave omissions and there's lack of clarity of what disinformation really is. Probably the most comprehensive survey of it is this book here, Social Media, Political Polarization and Political Disinformation. And it does a meta-analysis of how academic research describes the field. And there are some common lack of definitions in here for the most important terms, including what's disinformation, how's it different from misinformation, what's online propaganda, what is hyper-partisan news, what's clickbait, what's fake news, what's conspiracy theories. So a lot of things lumped together. And it seems like every author writing about this topic is defining things in their own way. And the only thing that this comprehensive survey of the field can come up with is a lowest common denominator definition, saying disinformation is intended to be a broad category describing the types of information that one could possibly encounter online that could possibly lead to misperceptions about the state of the world. It's a very broad definition. So where does it get us? In particular, we want to tackle disinformation in the ad industry. So we got some housekeeping to do. So I'm delighted to welcome my panelists to discuss exactly that over the next half an hour. So please, dear panelists, switch on your cameras and your microphones. I'm delighted to welcome Alberto Rabakin, Deputy Head of Unit at DG Connect, David Goddard, Vice President of Business Development at DoubleVerify, Cecilia Vanoletti, the Team Leader of Customer Success at Integral Ad Science, Justin Adler-Swanberg, straight from the West Coast today, Director of Marketplace Quality at MediaMath, and my colleague, Greg Mroczkowski, Policy Director at IB Europe. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. And let's really dive straight in with you, Alberto. I know the European Commission has published a lot on disinformation and followed the topic. But from your perspective, if you heard my introduction, what is disinformation? How is it different from misinformation? And how do you capture that in a policy arena?
Yes, thank you, David, for this invitation. And since we don't have too much time, I will go directly to the definition that we gave in 2018 when we issue our first communication regarding the strategy that we wanted to employ to tackle the phenomenon of disinformation. And the definition is disinformation is understood as verifiably false or misleading information that is created, presented, and disseminated for economic gain or to intentionally deceive the public and may cause public harm. So there are several elements inside this definition. Of course, there is an element that is related to the content, so verifiable false or misleading information. Of course, even here, we can open a debate on what is verifiable false and misleading information. But anyway, I just wanted to list the different elements that compose this definition. So an element related to the content, an element that is related to how the content is created, presented, and disseminated. We realize that behind this information campaign, there is not only false content, because this information campaign can also be based on misleading content that is not necessarily false, but these information campaigns are characterized by a certain behavior that malicious users undertake to spread this information. They use automated amplification through bots or fake accounts, for instance, to make sure that their campaign becomes viral. And then, of course, there is a third element, which is why they do this information, why they run this campaign. And there is an element which could be for economic gain. So they seek to gain money by spreading this information, or they have another agenda, a political agenda, and they're trying to deceive the public in order to gain a better position in the political debate. And of course, we also include the fact that it might lead to public harm. Well, public harm is also then defined there as different facets. And of course, we include harm to the political process, harm to the health of the citizens, and to the environment or to the security framework. It's a complex definition, but to be a disinformation campaign, you need to have different ingredients inside. So this is the type of disinformation that we try to tackle with our initiative. I just mentioned the main initiative that we have, that is the Code of Practice on Disinformation. That is a self-regulatory initiative, let's say, that we push for, that major online platforms have taken on board, and they are working now on a revision of this code that it was implemented in 2019. To be a little bit more focused on the audience of this event, one of the elements of the Code of Practice is to reduce the financial incentives of purveyors of disinformation. And these financial incentives comes mainly from online ads that are used to fuel disinformation, that are used to seek for an economic gain. So maybe we'll have later the possibility to go a little bit more in detail on this aspect.
Thanks for that outline. It's very clear. It's complex. There are many different variables involved. It isn't black and white. You talked about a code of practice that is being reviewed, but you also mentioned, of course, the role of advertising. Now, David, coming to you, trying to tackle disinformation or defunding advertising in order to curb disinformation. And how do you actually implement these definitions in a technical way to do that in practice? That seems challenging.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Alberto, for the definitions. So, Daniel, as you said, I want to highlight now how these definitions are applied in tools available for industry stakeholders today. For those who don't know, DoubleVerify is a leading independent platform for digital media measurement, software and analytics that authenticates media quality and effectiveness for digital media for some of the world's largest brands. And our role as a technology provider is to both protect brand equity and drive media quality, and tackling misinformation and disinformation helps us to achieve those goals. Now, for our industry, technology is one of the key solutions that can help us tackle misinformation, disinformation, which has clearly evolved over recent years. So for the purpose of this panel, I can share how DoubleVerify is doing this. And one of the most important elements to this solution is our semantic science team, which enables us to accurately categorize content at scale and recognize the nuances between content. So what I mean by this is, take a basic example for the word vaccine. This word can be found in thousands of pieces of digital media every day, especially these days, and many of those will be legitimate pieces of content from trusted publishers, and depending on the story itself, may also be safe and suitable places for ads to appear. However, some will be also disinformation, and some won't be suitable for places for brands to appear. So semantic science can understand those nuances and ensure how brands only can appear alongside trusted, safe and suitable content. It can learn to identify disinformation around a topic like vaccines and help brands cut ads and funding from those sources. And this is a step beyond kind of the typical keyword block list. And this highlights one of the conversation points today. Is the keyword block list can be both block legitimate voices, it can easily become outdated as news cycles changes, and they can damage publishers' ability to monetize legitimate content on topics, for example, by blocking ads appearing against content with the word vaccine in it that is legitimate. And this was one of the challenges which we've seen, like we need to address as an industry, because this can lead to a deterioration of relationship between brands, agencies, publishers, and tech providers, which is only going to impede the industry's efforts to tackle this important issues such as misinformation, disinformation. So utilizing nuanced tools to tackle this issue is critical to enable the monetization of legitimate content and the defunding of disinformation.
You already highlighted how definitions that Alberto highlighted can be put into practice. Let's zoom out a little bit and say, why are we doing this as an industry? Why is disinformation such an important topic in the industry? Justin, with MediaMath, you provided DSP capabilities. You are deeply embedded in the world of media buying. So what do you think are the biggest challenges that the specter of disinformation causes to us as an industry, digital advertising and ad tech in particular?
Sure. I think that there is a challenge that's particularly around some of the descriptions that were given already for disinformation. You have content that is highly emotional, that is driving people to engage with the content, but that is purveying disinformation. So there's this interesting sort of challenge where this content actually drives many of the outcomes that people, if you just look at the data, you might get engagement or clicks or whatever, clickbait, but it's actually causing a problem. So I think that it's very important for the industry to step in and provide tools that will allow for people to discern between what is content that is legitimately driving a positive engagement outcome versus content that is actually causing harm. And it's very important for brands to have tools like, for example, my colleagues at DoubleVerify and IAS provide, which we provide within our platform, both of these companies as well as others, to allow for clients to make sure that they are monetizing that inventory, which is actually going to positively drive their outcomes in a way that is consistent with, supporting quality advertising, quality content, et cetera. So it's this challenge. You need to have these tools to step in and mitigate. Otherwise, you end up supporting a lot of these things that are going to drive people to engage, but are not really, great for the social situation because of disinformation and such.
Mm-hmm. And we've seen, of course, a content explosion over the last couple of years in the web, now in particular in video, in mobile, in completely new environments. Cecilia, when you look at your data, when you look at your clients, have we seen an increase in disinformation online over the past year or last couple of years? Is the problem growing, or do we have it under control?
It would be great to tell that we have everything under control, but sadly, this is not the truth. Like, we are seeing this phenomenon growing, and as a human being, probably the way in which you better understand when something is happening, is becoming a threat, is when it happens to you or to someone close to you. And last year, for example, for the first time, there was a client of ours, an automotive brand, running EMEA programmatic campaigns that starting having this problem that its bid went to a website that was clearly a disinformation website. So they use their verification to put the website in an exclusion list, which is the way you, let's say, as a human being, handle with this. But then as soon as they do this, a new website with the same kind of content emerge and intercept the media. So as Alberto was saying, the problem is that money goes where eyeballs are, and sometimes eyeballs are not where you wish them to be. So what we've been doing in that case is switching the approach, going towards automation and work to pre-filter content, as also David was saying, using sentiment analysis, semantic technology, using natural language processing, and also the capability of reading emotion to really figure out what is disinformation before a bid is there, before a banner is there, before money is there, and solve the issue. And another cool data that we learned last year, cool for this conversation, but not cool in general, is that in 2020, among all the misinformation domains that we identified, 35% were completely new. We never saw them before. The phenomenon is growing. We have like numbers and histories to tell this.
So 35% increase, and we're seeing complex definitions. You, Cecilia, David, Justin, now all explained how you're approaching things from a company perspective. But of course, we need concerted effort across the industry, standards, collaboration. So Greg, as a representative of a trade body, I want to turn to you. What can we do collectively as an industry to fight disinformation and overcome this challenge that advertising is implicated in driving it?
That I think is a pertinent question, and I think I would like to give a very clear-cut answer. Probably it's not possible, but it's clear to us that investment of the whole chain remains key. I think David spoke about the deterioration of the relationships between different parts of the industry. Alberto did mention that we have seen investments from the big tech, but he also did remark, I think, that the code of practice, for instance, is supposed to be a very flexible tool accommodating for the needs of more players. So from our perspective, I think it is critical to bring to the fore these different perspectives when we speak to other stakeholders, and these may be stakeholders in the broader digital advertising ecosystems, advertisers, agencies, ad tech publishers, but it can be also other actors that are part of this conversation. So indeed, platforms or different type of digital properties, but also fact checkers and other commercial products that would help to understand what disinformation is, or where the issues lie. And maybe I would just close it saying that indeed there are, you Daniel mentioned standards, for instance. There are quite a few, I think, good ideas out there, or good sort of products, ventures that, for instance, some of our national IABs have been helping to build about trust and transparency. These are maybe not immediate answers, but they could serve as a stepping stone to better things.
You mentioned standards, and indeed there's probably an abundance of standards, but there's always a gap between standards and the actual implementation. Sometimes what people say in public and what they really do is something different. So with standards, with definitions in there, if we just look at, just very briefly, David and Justin, you both, how are you with your tools supporting the industry? Are you building proprietary things, or are you in dialogue with trade groups to ensure that we can tackle things in the same way?
I don't mind jumping in here. I outlined some of the things we're doing utilizing semantic science. We also have partnerships with third-party or partners out there to enhance our capabilities to tackle specific things like this. But maybe I can talk about maybe an industry level, because we are actively involved in IAB Europe, as many of my colleagues on this panel are, and also we're leaning into the code of practice, which is really important, that Alberto and his colleagues are doing at the European Commission level. And I think industry stakeholders can help people get educated by contributing to the conversation, similar to all we are doing on this, because sharing resources, taking part in events such as this is going to lead to better results in tackling important subjects such as this. Now, on disinformation, there are a few things that we may want to recommend out there, like, from our perspective, of advertisers using the tools available to them in platforms such as Busienss and other platforms out there will absolutely help this. Solution providers across the board, not just verification, but you've got multiple providers out there working on disinformation and misinformation, specifically working with platforms and publishers to help create safer environments. I'd love to see third-party accreditations for how these solutions could work as well, such as Media Ratings Council, to boost transparency, measurability, and identification of untrustworthy actors. But one of the questions I think would be really useful to answer on this call is, why should clients care? Because they're, at the end of the day, putting the advertising out there. And if not for the societal impact of disinformation, in our research, we found that over half, 55% of consumers saying a brand appearing alongside fake or inflammatory news would negatively impact the future purchase decision. And I also want to highlight again, this demonstrates not a need to avoid topics like news wholesale, but for a nuanced approach in relation to brand safety and suitability when tackling misinformation and disinformation. So Daniel, I probably spoke about multiple things here, but one of those is industry collaboration, but also all of us talking about this, how important tackling this issue is in public to make sure that everyone's aware, and when the tools are available, use them.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I completely agree with David's point there. This is not, it's a social issue. It's also a brand safety issue. I think that one of the things that's really important is for players to really lean into their responsibility. The word accountability means something in particular. At MediaMath, we've taken a position via our source initiative on accountability, addressability, being aligned. So it's very important to take a public stance, but actually support it. We support tools like DV and IAS. We also work with the Global Disinformation Index, where we basically use a list that they provide us that allows us to block the worst of the worst that's across our whole platform. You have to lean into your responsibility to do these things. And I think the clients expect that because they're not in the business of identifying all this stuff. So they rely on these tools to do.
It's an interesting term, leaning into responsibility. I'm going to come back to you, Alberto. When you see what the industry is doing to tackle disinformation, how is this supported at the political level? How are you looking at the industry, and how are you trying to potentially kind of build partnerships to solve this together?
Yeah, let me say that from the political level, we have a lot of support. This is one of the priority of the Commission. So we have commissioners engaged in this battle, let's say, against disinformation. And of course, this information is part also of the discussion of the problem that the new Digital Services Act will try to take. And of course, there is an underlying discussion between the institution now to finalize this new act. So our effort is really here, and specifically on the issue of monetization of disinformation or demonetization of disinformation, is really our willingness is really to bring together all the actors that plays a role in the online advertisement chain. And of course, we have seen progress in the willingness of these actors to work together. And this is also why we are calling for a new type of signatories to come and join the code, because we see that enlarging the participation can ensure a more effective implementation of the code. Specifically in the area of advertisement, online advertisement, we are trying to call in third-party service provider, which give relevant information regarding the quality of a website, not only from the technical point of view, but also from the content point of view, in order to make sure that the different players in the chain have the information regarding where the ads might land. And of course, we are trying also to pull in the brands, the customers of your services, and because they are the one that should be most concerned on how their money is spent. This is really our next step, is to convince everybody to come around the table and discuss about a strengthened code of practice where all these actors can play together and make a real difference in the battle against disinformation.
Thanks for that. I can see potential for public-private partnerships. We see it a lot often in the fintech regulation with high-frequency trading, RegTech, and so forth. I think this is really one of the things where economic, social, and other factors come together, which really necessitate, I think, probably stronger than ever collaboration between industry and policymakers to fill skills gaps, to understand definitions, and so forth. So I think it was very good that we had all these different perspectives on the panel, and we're already out of time. Just Cecilia, I want to close with you just in 30 seconds. What do you think is next for the topic of disinformation and online advertising in the next 12 months? Will we solve it then, or what milestones?
I believe that in terms of milestones, we should keep building on what we said today. So we start having consistency on definition. This is the ground base to start working on this. And then I believe our next focus should be the scale, because as has already emerged in some conversation, languages are a topic because we need to understand nuances. We need to understand what happens on markets that might not speak English as a native language. And also we are starting working to increase our coverage and be actually relevant in our fight against disinformation. We should start also consider channels where the language might be English or Italian or German, but it's a completely different way of using it. If you think about TikTok videos, we can't analyze them in the same way as we analyze an article to determine if it's in disinformation or misinformation. And same of if I think about lives on Twitch. So our next effort, even if we haven't accomplished the results we wanted to accomplish yet, is to start and keep thinking about this issue of coverage, because we are using technology to handle the challenge of the speed in which content is created and spread. So we are almost there on that. The safety and suitability topic has been almost addressed in terms of having standards and shared definition. And so I think that next 12 months will be the one where we see if our coverage can be enough in terms of geography and relevance of.
The to-do list is certainly full, but these are all very exciting topics. And thank you everybody for joining, sharing your views. And I think this panel has shown how essential collaboration is, and that we need to both work on the basics, the definitions, and the implementation. Technological, human, what can algorithms do, where do we need people, etc. This wasn't the last discussion we had at IB Europe on disinformation, far from it, and we look forward to continuing this conversation with all you on the panel and with all of you people in the audience. And with that, thank you very much, and I pass back to the host.